Alright, well hello. My demonstration for you today has to do with making a coil pot. In this particular instance we're going to make a small coil pot. What you've learned already is how to roll out a slab and make things using just a basic slab form. You also have some familiarity with making coils by this time in my class. So what we're going to do is we're going to combine those two methodologies today. We're going to make a slab, roll out a slab, cut it into a shape, and then we're going to start rolling out coils and start using some slip and build up the walls of our small coil pot. I have in front of me three different examples of small coil pots. This one takes on a little bit of a rectangular shape. It is 5 coils high. And these coils are, about finger size by the time they're all said and done. So that one's a little bit of a rectangular shape. I just kind of cut that out with a knife. I didn't use a template, any particular form. I just cut something rectangular and I started building upon that. And you can do that if that's what you'd like to do. The one here in the middle, this started out with a round base. This was made by a student a few years ago, actually about 5 years ago. This started with a round base and commonly made just with a plastic lid off of a container. This one is 5 coils high that are on top of the base. And this one's also got a little bit of a decorative bottom to it. Basically started round, but it's got a little bit more of a decorative edge to it. This is 5 coils high. So I have in front of me 6 pieces of clay that are going to make coils. I may or may not use all of them, but I like to have everything together that I'm going to work with so that I'm not running all over the studio trying to find any of the supplies or materials that I might need. So I'm going to set my examples back on the shelf, because now you know what it is we're going to be making. So we'll put those aside. And maybe you'll see those as we go through the video. Now the other tools that I have, obviously I have some clay, and I'm going to work with those as we go. I have a ball of clay that's about the size of a baseball. This is what I'm going to use to form my base of my pot. I have just a margarine container. This can be used. What's nice is with the lid and the rim and the base, I've got actually 3 different size of circles that I can use as a template when I trim out the base of my pot in this case. The container can also be used for different things as well. So that's one of the tools that I have set aside here. I have a wood modeling tool. This is a very versatile tool that a potter can find a lot of value with in the studio. I have a paring knife, just a simple knife out of the kitchen. One of my favorite tools to use. Has a nice sharp point. It has a bit of a serrated edge. I find a lot of versatility with a paring knife. A fettling knife, which is a pretty common pottery studio tool as well. What's nice is when you think about coils, I used to use the expression make them finger diameter. Well, then I realized that everybody's got different diameter fingers. So when I want something the same diameter so that any of my students can get a coil that's approximately the same size, I advise them to use the handle of the fettling knife, because those handles, I can pick up 50 different knives and the handles are all made the same. So this way, if the fettling knife handle is used as a guide, the coils are going to be all approximately that same size. Okay, so that's a pretty nice tool there. I have an old toothbrush, which I use in conjunction with slip. The slip is going to be used. Slip is just watered down clay. So this is clay in a fairly liquid form, but the clay components are there. I'll be using slip and the toothbrush. The toothbrush works to kind of rough up the coils in each surface area as I build and attach each coil. So slip is a nice component there. It's helpful. It's very helpful. I have a banding wheel which spins, of course, and I have an elevated wheel as well, so I can bring my project a little bit closer to me. So as we begin, a couple other tools. What I also have is a rolling pin, okay, for clay. I need to roll out my base. I can start by patting it out, but I want to roll it so it's the same thickness. And I have what you've seen in the past with rolling slabs, is I have 2 wooden sticks This is from a meter stick, so these happen to be the same thickness, so I at least know that my slab of clay will be uniform in thickness if I roll out a piece of clay with one of these sticks on each side of it. So, as I begin, I'm going to set aside for right now the tools that I don't need at the moment, and I will retrieve them as I do need them. So I'm going to set my clay up here, stack that up. That's what I'm going to make coils out of. Rolling coils, uniform in size and consistency and without air pockets, can be a challenging adventure for some of you. So now with this ball of clay, what I hope to with the coils is show you a couple different methodologies that I've used. You have to keep in mind I have rolled out, at this point in life, thousands, maybe tens of thousands of coils. So I can make it look very easy. I can make it look quite silly. But it's not to embarrass you and make it look more complicated than it actually is. As you start with a ball of clay, I like to begin by flattening out a little bit and thinning it out so I don't have so much work to do with rolling it. And I'm rolling this in somewhat of a round fashion. I have predetermined that I wanted to make something that is round to start with. I could use that lid if I want to. Anything round, whatever shape, you can use as a template. So keep in mind, yes, it's great to reuse or recycle these types of containers. I generally have a few around the studio just for a variety of purposes. So as I continue to pinch out this piece of clay to thin it, we can do a little patty cake with it. Gently pat and turn. That's a pretty decent thickness right now. And now I can take my rolling pin, make sure it's clean. Alright, and I'm going to start to roll that piece of clay out. Now, with a rolling pin and the meter sticks, just as we did with making a slab plate or a slab bowl, you want to make sure that when you apply a roller to the clay, you're applying stress only on one side. I make the analogy, I liken this to grilling a steak. If you don't cook the steak only on one side, well, guess what? You don't roll your clay only from one side. You have to keep in mind two things. You want to even out the stress, but you also have to think of the shape that you're after. If I wanted something to be oblong in shape or rectangular, I would continue to roll it simply in one direction. However, I want something that's round, so as I started from there, I'm not only going to turn my piece of clay, but I'm also going to flip my piece of clay. Turning it will even out my shape, flipping it evens out the stress as I continue to roll it. And this is a very gentle downward pressure. So I'm going to flip and turn. You saw that all in one nice motion. Alright, I roll it a little bit, and here again I'm going to, here let's turn it, and then I'm going to flip it. Make sure you catch that. Flip and turn. Flip and turn. Remember that the rolling, or the meter sticks, will help determine the finished thickness of my piece of clay. Alright, so that's pretty close there. I'm just going to kind of finish that off a little bit. Alright, there we are. Now, that's my finished thickness, and that is meter stick thick. I know I'm going to have some excess around that, but basically I'm now done with my meter sticks and my rolling pin, so I'm going to set those aside. I don't need them in my workspace anymore. Now, I could say that I want this to be small. Well, that leaves me with a lot of wasted clay. So why don't I look for something a little bit larger? Something a little bit larger. Hey, how about that? There we go. I have something still round. It's larger. I can use that, and I can actually press that in a little bit and create just a little bit of a mark or a guide. There we are. And then I can trim that. So that's okay. Now as I trim that around, I might even just put that on my banding wheel. I want to be cautious here that I don't put too much downward pressure, because this is a surface that the clay can stick to. So my downward pressure, this is a smooth surface, I want to make sure that it's not sticking. Alright, so I can see that mark, but maybe I want to put that back on there just so I have a particular guide. I press my knife tip through that, and I can turn this very easily, and now I'm getting rid of the excess clay. That leaves me with scrap. There we are. And I just want to make sure again that that is not stuck too much down there. Now, that's a nice round piece of clay. I'm going to go ahead and bring that up so I get that a little bit higher. So now what I like to do is, as I have that surface area, now I need to prepare my coils. I like to work in a manner where I'm working in a sequence, okay, or an order or a process. So, by example, I have first rolled out what is going to become my slab base. Now I'm going to set that aside. What I need to do now is I need to roll out the coils that I'm going to use for this project. So I have a few pieces of clay here that I've already cubed. These are a little bit over an inch in thickness and off of a fresh bag of clay, so that makes them about 4 inches long. So what I can do, some variety. I said I was going to share with you some variety. As we've done in the past, you may squeeze to round those coils out a little bit. Just squeeze it between your hands. Different potters have different techniques. I'll demonstrate what I have found to be effective techniques. Now, notice that I am standing. I have found the most effective methodology for myself when rolling coils is to do so while standing. I'm able to apply an even amount of pressure, a uniform amount of pressure across all of the surface of my clay. A couple of considerations for you. Make sure that your workspace is relatively clean and free of debris. If you have a lot of dried particles of clay on your work surface, you're apt to pick those up with your fresh piece of clay. This soft, fresh clay will pick up that dried stuff, and then you get that into your coils. That's not advisable. We want to avoid doing that. All right? Now, when I'm working, if you notice my hand is fanned out to about its widest point. So when I'm working from fingertip all the way to palm, and I move back and forth, and I move from left to right and from right to left. I move back and forth across my coil with an even amount of pressure. Now, I do want to keep in mind 2 things. Number 1, the length of coil that I'm going to need to go around the base of my pot. So I'm going to roll this to a diameter that's going to give me a sufficient amount of length. Now, I mentioned the word diameter. Let's think about what's important there. A larger diameter coil is generally easier to work with. The smaller it is, the harder it is to work with. You have less clay to work with later on. So, I mentioned at the beginning, the handle of the fettling knife. Let's bring that back in. As I compare that right now, the coil that I've rolled out so far is a bit larger than the handle on my fettling knife. So I'm going to keep that knife there so I have that as a guide. And I'm going to continue with gentle downward pressure, rolling out these coils. Until I reach something that's about the size, about the diameter of the handle on that fettling knife. And that is pretty decent, pretty close to that. I don't like to go too small with my coil diameter. Now, here's what's really important is when you end your coils. With the rolling process, depending upon how you've done that, you may end up with a bit of an overlapping piece of clay at each end of your coil. What now becomes important before you start working is to make sure that you cut those ends of the coil off so that you have something that's uniform, okay? And you may also have, with that overlap of clay at the end, you may have created a little air pocket in there. So what I like to do is get rid of those ends and have a nice clean end on my coils. So I have one. I'm going to set that aside. Now I'm going to roll out another one. I'm going to quickly work. This clay is starting to crack apart on me a little bit. That tells me that it's stressing and it's drying a little bit on me. So I want to work quickly. You can see I'm working a little bit faster as I go. what I like to do is, as I say, I like to work in a sequence, in a process. So I like to work in a manner where I'm doing the same process all the time. So I rolled out my slab as the base. Now I'm rolling out the coils that I'm going to use. If you don't squeeze it out to start with, you get that little thumpity thumpity, okay? And you might think that you're visiting with some of the characters from a Disney movie, like Thumper from Bambi. So, as I continue to roll those coils, I'm working quickly. Do keep in mind, your body is producing heat, energy. The longer your hand is in contact with the clay, the more quickly it will dry out. So, if you can work fast, you've got a much better chance of keeping a moisture level in your clay that is suitable for working. So I have 3 coils rolled out, and you can see that they're a little bit different in length, and that's okay because I'm going to trim them, I'm going to do some cutting, and I'm going to get them so that they fit across the base of my pot. Now I'm going to go ahead and roll out all 6 pieces here so that I know I have enough to work with. Now, an important thing to keep in mind is that your coils aren't going to be exactly the same size, okay? And that's all right. If you want them exactly the same size, you might find that you're going to invest in a machine called an extruder. Extruders are commercially made. They kind of remind me of a childhood Play-Doh machine, but an extruder is a much larger device. Just like a Play-Doh machine, it incorporates a die on the front of the machine, and you fill a hopper with Play-Doh, press down on the paddle, and depending upon the die that was in front, the Play-Doh will come out in that particular shape. In much similar fashion, an extruder, which can be mounted to a table or fastened to a wall, an extruder uses dies, and you fill up the chamber with clay, use the lever device, plunger, and force that clay through that die, and again it comes out in that shape. It could be a coil of different sizes. It could be something that's tubular or hollow. It could be in the shape of a belt or a band of clay. There are quite a variety of dies that are commercially made for use with an extruder. An extruder is what some studios refer to as a luxury device. If you're doing a lot of coil building, well, then it might be advisable to invest in an extruder. If you don't have the time to spend rolling coils in the fashion that I am here. So I'm up to 5. And now here comes number 6. And then I'm going to be done rolling coils. Then I'm going to start fashioning the coil pot. I'm going to start building up the walls of the coil pot. What you also want to keep in mind is when you're dealing with a clay pot, you have to think about the functionality of said pot. Do you want to use it as a bowl, as a flower base? Do you want to put anything that's food or liquid inside of the vessel? And if that is the case, then you have to think in advance about how you're going to finish that vessel, if you're going to glaze the inside of that vessel. And in the case of a coil pot, if you wanted to have liquid inside of the pot, you would want to consider maybe having a smooth surface on the inside. By example, this particular coil pot, while the integrity of the coil remains on the outside of the pot, so that anybody who looks at it can see that is a coil pot, and they can comment, wow, that's a nice coil pot, or they can say, wow, that's a really terrible job, I don't like how the coils look. Well, you look on the inside, and the inside of this pot has been smoothed out. I mentioned a wood modeling tool. The wood modeling tool is going to come in very handy when it comes time for me to smooth the inside of those coils and blend them together. Most of my coil pots, I like to have an inside surface that is smooth rather than coil. It makes the job of glazing a lot easier, and it also, which makes it a more functional pot in the end because the glaze has a greater surface space to it. Alright, so I've rolled out my coils. Now I need to bring in my base. And what I'm going to begin with is just taking one of my coils, and I want to lay that coil on top of the base. I don't want it on the outside, I want it on top of. If we think in any form of construction, we build on top of a base, we don't build on the outside. Now, here I see with this one that my coils, this is probably just as long as a couple of the short ones there. I can see that doesn't quite meet. So I have a couple of options. I can bring that inside a little bit, which is okay, and I can see that the ends of that coil are going to meet up, and I haven't moved it too far from the edge. So I'm going to make that work. So now as I build this, I want to have my slip. Depending upon how fresh your clay is, you might be able to just use water. So what I'm going to do here is, remember, I've already trimmed the ends so that I don't have any air pockets there. And I want to trim those ends, and now as I slip them and join them together, I'm going to pinch that, and pinch it around, and pinch it around, so that the end of that, each end of that piece of clay, that coil that I rolled out, when I'm all said and done, it looks seamless. Okay? You want to make it look like it's a donut. Donut doesn't have a seam. It's all one round unit. So now I have that respectively. I've got that joined together. Now, what I'm going to continue to do is I'm going to pick up, I know I've got a couple other short ones here. I want to see how that fits around there. And I could keep the short ones for a little bit later on if I wanted to, but I'm going to make this one basically straight up and down. So that one fits all right. I'm going to slip up those ends. And see here again, I'm working in process, in a sequence. I did not just roll and attach a coil, roll and attach a coil, roll and attach a coil. I rolled out my coils, and now I'm connecting them so that I can get a working coil. And I'm securely connecting the ends together so it's like it's seamless. Alright, and I'm laying that on there. So I can see, as I just kind of gently lay those on there, there's no slip in between, so these coils aren't going to stick together. As I lay that on there, I can see what my pot's going to look like as I build it. Here's the next one. And there again, that's pretty good. So I'm going to go ahead and seal that up and work those ends together, smooth them over. Now, let's rewind for a moment, and let's recall that as I made each coil, I cut off each end, just in case there was that odd chance that an air pocket happened to evolve as I rolled out the coil. If there's an air pocket, remember from our previous lessons, that if there happens to be an air pocket in the clay, if you cover up an air pocket, that's a space where air exists. When that piece gets fired to bisqueware, it's very likely that that pot will explode. And subsequently, you no longer have a pot, and any pots that might have been around it could become what I just call collateral damage. It's not just going to be your pot that's lost, but other pots that are around it during the bisfiring could be lost as well. It might be yours, it might be somebody else's. In my environment, this is high school, so we have numerous student pieces that are going to be surrounding that pot. So we really need to keep in mind, and we need to work to our greatest advantage to ensure that every piece that we make comes out as a fine finished product. Okay. Now, my other coils were a little bit longer in length. What I can do, just to kind of preempt things, is I can go ahead and trim them up so they're about the same length. Alright, get rid of that excess. Now I know that the 3 remaining coils I have are about the same length. As I lay that on there, and now I can see here that that coil is a bit longer yet. So as I measure this up, I'm going to get myself a measurement there, where that happens to be, and I'm going to trim that off. So that's where that about fits together, maybe a little bit less. Now what's also nice too is to actually instead of making a straight cut, is to make a cut on an angle. It provides a little more surface area as you're working. So that coil is about going to fit on there. So what I'm going to do in advance now is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to cut my remaining coils to approximately the same length. And here I'm cutting, you can see, on a bit of an angle. So I've done that in advance. Now I don't have to do that one at a time. Remember, I like working in process, in a sequence. To me, that just makes sense. All right. So now I have those angles. Now I can go ahead, I know the length is about right. Go ahead and slip those up. Work that together. Pinch, pinch, pinch. Alright, that fits on there. And notice too, when I'm just kind of setting these up, I'm just stacking them up. I am not constructing right now. I'm not assembling. So that's going to happen after a little bit. Once I'm done connecting my coils, then I will begin the process of assembling, of constructing the walls. So here I have a beveled edge, slip that up, work those together. Everything looks seamless. And I can turn that a little bit. I want to. You see how nice the banding wheel, how helpful the banding wheel. Now there I've taken my beveled edges and I've twisted them, I've turned them a little bit so I have more surface area. If you know anything about construction, you know what I'm talking about. It's just a greater advantage. Okay, rather than two blunt ends, it's nice to have two beveled edges. It's just more surface area. Alright, so as I smooth those over. Alright, now I can take, and pretty much my coils are all the same size, the same length now. So it's not really going to make much difference which coil I start with or in what sequence I work. But if I take them off, and I'm going to stack them up in reverse order. So as I pick one up at a time, I know just where it goes. So here's my base coil. So now that I know where I'm starting at, what I want to do now is I want to take and get a nice layer of slip going on that base layer. And this slip is made of the same clay that we're working with. This is Dover White. It's a cone 5 clay body. So as I take that, slip that area up, now I set that base coil on there. Now what I want to do is I want to gently press that coil down so that it's securely attached to the base slab. So I have a base slab and I have a base coil. And I want to make sure that my slab is not sticking to my banding wheel. Okay? I want to make sure that that's not stuck on there. I'm going to go ahead, just because I have a plaster back over here. I like working on a plaster surface. This is a plaster back. Plaster is porous. So I like working on plaster. Clay doesn't stick to it, so I should have been working on this all along. That should have been another one of my tools that I had in front of me, is a plaster back. So when we do our tools, don't forget to include a plaster back. So I've got that pressed down a little bit. I could take, if I wanted to, and ensure a little bit more adhesion. Grab myself a wooden spoon out of my utensil jar here, and I could gently pat that down. I'm gently patting that base coil down to the base, the slab base. Now, you'll see what we have here is we've got a little bit of an edge. I'm going to take that wood modeling tool and I'm going to push that edge, which is from my base slab. I'm holding gently on the coil, the base coil, and I'm pushing inward ever so slightly at the base slab to make the base slab become one with the base coil. That seals up that space. and I'll be able to smooth that out later on as we go as well. Now, I remember I decided that I want the inside of my pot to have a smooth surface, so with the base coil, what I'd also like to do is take a little bit of that clay and I'm going to push that down, just so I can use my thumb, and I can push that down, okay, from each side. What I want to make sure is that I am filling in the space. I don't want to cover it. If I have a space and I simply cover it, I run the risk of an air pocket. Whereas if I fill that in, then I don't leave any gaps. And I don't run the risk of an air pocket being between the coil and the slab in this case. I don't want to trap any air any place in my pot. So I've taken that opportunity now and I've compressed that clay downward. You can use your wood modeling tool, and it's nice to use it wet because it has more lubrication. And again, I'm gently pushing some of that clay down to seal the base coil to the base slab. It seems like a technical process and it seems like there might be a lot to this, but remember, this is an instructional video. If I were working and just creating this on my own, yes, I would be following the steps, but I would be doing so in a much quicker fashion rather than going slower and demonstrating. Okay? So, I've now sealed that base coil to the base slab. So I hope you've clearly seen how that process. That's inside and outside. Now what I need to do is I need to rough up my coil for the next one. Now, another method that some of you may have seen in the past is to use a little brush for scoring. And if I happen to put my hands on one here, there we are. This little wire brush, okay, maybe take a look at that little wire brush. It's just braided wire, and you can see how nicely that roughs up the surface. Well, some potters will use that. It's a little stiffer, a little more aggressive than a toothbrush is, but this is a process of scoring. Okay, a toothbrush generally works fine. Okay, but if you had a little wire brush like this, you could use it. It's okay. What's more important, really, is that you have a sufficient layer of slip. Okay, you've got to have enough slip on there to effectively bond those two pieces of clay together. The drier the clay, once it gets more towards leather hard, then you've got to make sure that you have more slip. All right, so I've taken that next coil. Remember, I'm just working in reverse order now. Okay, and again, I'm gently pressing it down. I want to make sure that that coil is securely fastened to the coil below it. Okay, again, I can take my little spoon here. I notice some flaking on there, so maybe I'll clean off some of that dried clay, and I can gently tap that down. Alright, now, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to rough up, because now I'm building. Okay, I got my base coil attached to the slab base. Now I'm building up my wall. So here I want to continue on. Okay, build up the coil, get it securely fastened down. Now, when you're doing this, you want to use an ample amount of pressure. You don't want to, go crazy with the pressure that you're adding to this. Too much pressure and you're going to collapse your coils. The clay for your coils is soft, so you need to use just enough pressure to connect the coils together. A little bit of a pat here, okay, and that helps to seal that up. Alright, more slip, the next coil. Now, I'd like to point out too, remember we sealed up the ends of each coil so they look like a donut. While it is true that I can see where that joint is, Okay, the advantage that provides me is that as I construct my coil pot, I'm not stacking the seams directly on top of each other. I don't want to do that. Okay, that's not good for strength. Bricklayers don't put a brick wall where the seams directly line up. That's not good construction practice. In the same respect, when we build with coils and we have seams, we don't put those seams joining the coil directly above one another. We alternate that seam. It just makes for better construction, and it makes our pot stronger than it otherwise might have been. Alright, so I'm going to continue. Now, what I'm also going to do is, remember we talked about as we build, I'm going to leave the outside, I'm going to leave that coil integrity there. I want to see that that is a coil pot. Whereas on the inside, what I'm going to do is I'm going to smooth the inside surface. So here you can see again, as I'm building, the function of the banding wheel. I don't have to turn everything. I'm not handling the pot and moving it. It's moving with the help of the banding wheel. I'm applying a gentle downward pressure. I'm not so much altering the shape of the coil, still keeping them relatively round. Okay, remember we went for the diameter of the handle of the fettling knife. So I'm still keeping them relatively round. I've got a flat edge on the bottom and a flat edge on the top. And that's because of how I'm connecting it. And gently patting that down as well. This pressure, I should point out, whether it's from a wooden spoon or anything else you might use, what we're really doing is that layer of slip that we've added. This is like glue. So you want to make sure that that slip is spreading out and covering all of the surface area between the two pieces of clay, in this case, coils. By getting all of that spread out, all of that slip, I assure myself that I have a better point of adhesion, that these coils are bonded together. So if I start picking this up by the coil, I know that coil is not going to separate from the one beneath it. And the same thing as I work my way down. You don't want to find that as you pick up a pot that your coils are coming apart because you didn't construct them very well. Okay, so I have one more coil, so I'm now going to be on my last layer here. Alright, here we are. I'm going to add that last coil. And what I might do is, just so I have an idea, because the coils are individual and they are unique, I might have a high side and a low side to my pot. So I may want to take a look at that before I fasten the coil down, just to see if the rim of my pot is somewhat level. And I see that there's a bit of a high side over here, a little bit of a low spot there. I can work with that. Okay, I'll also be able to do some leveling on that. But where the low spot is, I might take where my coil is a little bit thicker, okay, which is the joint, and I'll change that up. And where the coil was a little bit thicker, I put in the low spot, and that kind of fixes that up nicely. So now the rim of my pot is a little more level, a little more uniform. So again, with gentle pressure, push that down. Alright, and I'm going to go ahead and pat that a little bit. I don't want to go crazy with that, remember, because this is the top coil. Alright, I still have something level. Relatively so. Alright, it's not critical. Now, I was going to leave the outside coils, leave that integrity there. What I will do is I've noticed some cracking here. As you work with the clay, as you handle the clay, it will dry and it will stress out a little bit. By using a little bit of water, in my case a little bit of slip, just gentle pressure to rub back over the surface area, you can easily seal up those cracks and make it look more uniform, more even, more intentional, instead of a bit chaotic and haphazard. That's something you want to avoid. Now, if by chance I were to smooth out some of those joints a little bit, so it doesn't quite look like it's a coil, I can always go back with my wood modeling tool and I can redefine those joints between those coils. That's a pretty easy fix, so that I can take a look at that, and if I want to make it very clear to anybody looking at this pot that it is in fact made of coils, I can redefine those lines very easily with a wood modeling tool. And that way, at first glance, anybody who looks at this is going to say, now that's a coil pot. And then they can go on and say, well, it's not a very good looking coil pot, or they can say, well, that seems to be pretty well constructed, what have you. Always remember that everybody has a perspective on what is art and what looks good. So, first person that comes along may not like it. Second person that comes along might. And that's okay. That's okay. Always remember, this is your pot. You know what it is you're going to do with it. You might have a place for it, or you might have an idea in mind that you're going to give it to somebody as a gift. Okay? So, I've kind of smoothed that out, and now let's do what I was talking about. Let's redefine those outer coil edges. So just with the tip of the wood modeling tool, I can go back around and very easily redefine those spaces that make this look like a coil pot. What I want to make sure as I do this is that I do not have any air pockets that I'm creating or causing. So I'm just going around to redefine those lines. Remember, this is just so that anybody who looks at it can look at it and say, that is a coil pot. And there we are. Now I can soften those up a little bit later as we go. But now the next thing, you want to take a look. The inside of this pot right now, the integrity of the coils is there. You can see that from the angle. So what I'm going to start doing is I'm going to work, I can work just with my thumbs, okay, and gently what I'm doing is I'm pressing down. I have a point of resistance with my fingertips, and with my thumb opposing it, I'm gently moving the clay, in this case in a downward fashion. Remember, I did the very bottom coil. I did the base coil to the slab base to start with. I'm doing a very similar technique here with the coils that make up the wall. Okay, so you can see here at this point, I've started to smooth that out. And it's just a matter of blending. Alright, so now I could take the wood modeling tool and I could do something very similar. I'm going to hold as a point of resistance, and working now in an upward fashion, I'm actually bringing the clay up from the bottom, and the wood modeling tool is nice because it kind of looks like your thumb. So just as your thumb would be, have the curved edge, where your thumbnail would be, have that edge, so to speak, against the clay. Not the sharp edge, but the curved edge. Have that against the clay. Hold with your left hand on the outside. I happen to be right-handed. If you're left-handed, then you're going to do it this way. That's okay. But just make sure you have a point of resistance so that as you're working, and in this case pulling the clay upwards to seal the space between the coils and to smooth out the inner wall of your coil pot, to make that smooth, make it nice and uniform. If you did not work with a point of resistance on the outside, opposite of where you're working, this is a point of resistance, but if I'm working over here, I'm working contrary to what I need to be. So by working inside, opposite of my hand, compressing against, my point of resistance really and truthfully, that's preventing the wall from altering shape, from collapsing, from bulging out, anything of that nature. So what I want to do here is make sure that as I work, I'm compressing that clay firmly with my wood modeling tool, and I'm filling in, remember don't cover, fill the gaps that are there between the coils, just like your fingers. You're working to pull some clay into that and fill up that space. Whether you push down or whether you pull up, you're working to fill that gap. If you simply cover it, you create an air pocket. What's going to happen with an air pocket when it's misfired? We're going to have an explosion. So do everything to avoid that from happening, prevent that from happening. You'll be happy and your friends will be happy, because nobody's piece will have blown up or been damaged as a result of the pot blowing up. So here I can see that I've pretty well smoothed out. I'm just going to work now just to kind of tighten it up a little bit and even it out. There's a nice long straight edge to this tool, and there's also, you know, a beveled edge that's here. I can use that beveled edge as well. An expression that I like to use a lot when it comes to making pots and working with a tool. Think about what it is you want to do, the tasks you want to accomplish, what are you trying to achieve, and then think about what tool or what part of a tool is going to help you achieve that goal. If I want to smooth out a large surface, I want to be working with a tool that has a larger surface for smoothing. So as I think about that, I could incorporate, I have something here, a couple different tools. I have a metal scraper. Okay, it's flexible, it's aluminum, okay, and I could use that just as a gentle pressure, okay, and that provides me with a little more surface area than a wood modeling tool does. So you just have to think about what tools you have available and use them to your advantage. So this will provide me with a smoother surface. The wood modeling tool was nice because it gave me the initial first work that I needed to do, and now the metal scraper is working to tighten up and even out my surface area on the inside of the pot. This is difficult to see, but this is just a simple movement inside. But as you look inside now, you can see that the inside wall no longer looks like a coil pot. You can see that it is smooth. All right. So we've been using a wood modeling tool. We've incorporated a metal scraper. We also have at our disposal a potter's rib. It's made of wood. This is one of the standard tools in a pottery tool kit that you might buy at a craft store or at a pottery store. This one is made of wood. It has a nice curved edge, has a long straight edge, and a short straight edge. So again, you can use this. I like to use these tools damp. I'm going to spray a little water on there instead of using slip at this point. So I'm using that. What's nice about the wood, the metal is flexible. The wood is rigid. So again, with a point of resistance, I can now hold that outside wall, and using that potter's rib, I'm using the nice curved surface, and you can see how I'm moving a little bit of clay and smoothing out that inside surface. Very important to have that point of resistance, to be careful of what it is I'm doing with my tool so that I maintain control of that tool. I can change directions if I want to, as I can see what's happening and with the inner wall of my pot. And as I just work to smooth that out and make it more uniform, I can actually, if I were to do this right, give it the right time and attention to detail that it needs, I could make this pot as uniform, as even as a pot that I might otherwise throw at the potter's wheel. And if I were working at the potter's wheel, I would be able to texture the outside of the pot to make it look like it was made of coils. So it's just a matter, again, back to the expression I just shared with you. Think about what you want to do to your pot, what direction do you want to go in, and then think about what tool is going to help me get there. it can be very simple, it can be very difficult. But the one thing you always have to remember is it's just clay. And if it doesn't work the first time, you can always break it down and make more. So there we are. We have a nice smooth inside surface. We've left the integrity of the coils on the outside surface. Clean that up nicely. And in essence, now we have a coil pot that was 6 coils high plus the slab base that's meter stick thick. I can look at it, and for me that's approximately hand high. That measures from top to bottom on my hand. Now I know that after this fires, the clay shrinks as it fires, so this is going to be a little bit smaller. So it's not going to take on, it's not going to remain this height. Okay, it's going to get shorter and it's going to get a little bit smaller in diameter because of the shrinkage of the clay. So there I have that. Options we'll pursue in class if we wanted to change size, change directions. We'll talk about that more in class. That can just simply be a matter of making your coils either shorter or longer to build out or come in if you wanted to change the shape of your vessel. This is a small coil pot, so you don't have a whole lot of room for changing shape. When we make a large coil pot, we'll expand upon that, and there you'll deal with changing shape and making your coils shorter and making them longer to alter the shape of your pot. So hopefully you'll have the success that I've just had in making a small coil pot. Thanks for watching.